The Golden Age of Comic Books, month number 16. This ties in with the release of Action Comics number 16, the 16th month in a row that we've had Superman on the newsstands, and it is Superman's 18th appearance in comic books. Let's analyze all the comic books on the newsstands with a cover date of September 1939. Was a time of great growth in the industry. For the first time, we have over 30 different titles on the newsstand. We're up from 29 last month to 31 this month. Things are definitely growing. We have a few new series debuting yet again. There's more and more superhero comics and characters hitting each issue, and superheroes are now probably affecting 30% of the titles on the newsstands at this point. For Color Comics, the longest-running American comic book series of all time, debuted with its first issue, number 1, featuring an all-Dick Tracy special. And Mutt and Jeff, who had been in comics already for about 26 years, I believe, already is now getting their first full-length dedicated comic from DC. It was starting out as a one-shot, just like Superman number 1 did, but would prove to be popular enough that it would get published again and again and then become a frequent regular book, which is what also happened with Superman. So let's analyze the chart, see what else we find. The other series debuting this week, or this month, was Amazing Man Comics. Number 5 is the first issue. This is a very big key issue, very valuable, historic, lots of great big content in this book. So let's go through the list here a little bit, see a few things we notice. First of all, Detective Comics number 31, one of the most iconic comic books ever published, came out this month. It features the third cover appearance ever of Batman, and it is Batman's 5th appearance. It's one of the most famous Batman covers ever, and it's been redone many times over the decades, and it is the most valuable comic of the month by far. $20,000 in low grade in the Overstreet Price Guide, or $240,000. So that comic takes up 2/3 of the price for the complete chart. And due to its popularity, it's also by far the most common book on the CGC census, with 74 copies now graded, yet there is 0 high-grade copies in existence. And this chart does include restored and qualified and signed copies. After we get past Detective, the comics that seem to be the most common on the list, Adventure Comics number 42 has a hefty 26 copies graded by CGC. This is a very popular book, as it's an early appearance of the Sandman. And Amazing Man Comics number 5, the first issue, has 25 copies. That's quite a few, with its hefty $2,000 price tag. And Action Comics number 16, featuring Superman, but not on the cover, is at $667 for a low-grade copy. And note again how the books are starting to get graded a bit more often. There are 337 books in total on this chart, if you tally them up, that have been graded by CGC, and yet only 16 books in high grade total. Now, we know at this point the average comic is selling 200,000 copies a month. So times 31 titles, that is 6.2 million comics on the newsstands being sold this month. And yet only 337 copies of that have been graded. And only 16 out of 6.2 million have survived in high grade and been graded by CGC. What else do we notice off the chart? Well, books aren't as scarce as they used to be, but there's still a few, and the one that really jumps out is Keen Comics number 2. The title comes back after a 4-month break from Centaur. Very scarce, and 0 copies graded on the CGC census in any condition. And yet, a fairly low price tag, only $81. So this could prove to be one of the scarcest 1930s comics ever. Also with a 0 copy grade on the CGC census is Ace Comics number 30 and Popular Comics 43. But these have 0 grade copies because of the low Overstreet Price Guide. It's just not profitable for any dealer to get these books graded in low grade. Now, however, that doesn't explain why there's no high grade copies, unless there simply aren't any. If you take the the total of 16 copies graded in high grade on this entire list and divide that up, that's saying that there's not even one copy of each book. And we can see that the majority of these books do have 0. So what does have copies graded in high grade? Well, 4-Color Comics #1 surprisingly has 4 copies have survived in high grade copy. That's a pretty high number. And Mickey Mouse Magazine #48 has 3. This is usually due to there being file copies that have been kept by the publisher. What's the cheapest books on the list? Well, Famous Funnies from Eastern Color was now up to issue 62. It was the longest running comic book on the newsstands at this time, and therefore we're so far into the run that the prices are dropping now in the guide. So we're down to $29 to buy this book, and under $400 for a high-grade copy. So that's quite an affordable high-grade 1930s comic to collect. There are other titles that are fairly cheap, and that's because, again, they're also further into their runs and probably would not have superheroes in them, such as King Comics 41 is quite cheap, Ace Comics 30, Super Comics 16, Crackerjack Funnies 15, and Single Series #10 featuring Little Mary Mix-Up. It was very common at this time that all the books were anthologies, meaning that every issue would have a ton of different strips and genres in them. But this month we actually have 5 books, actually. We have 4-Color featuring Dick Tracy. We've got Mutt and Jeff. We've got Terry and the Pirate standing out in large feature comics. Little Mary Mix-Up in single series. And we've also got Mickey Mouse Magazine featuring the Disney characters. So it's becoming a little more common now that we have these standalone specific comics dedicated to a specific title or character. Let's take a moment and compare all this data with the actual sales figures for this time period. Now here's the September 1939 sales, which have been documented. Unfortunately, it's not every comic on the newsstands, but it gives us a good idea of what's happening. We'll see that Action Comics featuring Superman was by far the best-selling comic book again on the newsstand, now reaching sales of 625,000 copies. But after that, you may be surprised to see that the second best-selling comic on the newsstands was Tip Top Comics at a nice 441,000 copies, followed by Famous Funnies, also over 400,000 copies. After that, Feature Comic is still very strong at 387. After that, it starts to drop quite drastically. Comics on Parade is next at 271,000. And then after that, every other title drops down to approximately 200,000. So even the early Batman issues in Detective Comics, you'll see, would average out to roughly 200 to 250,000 copies. That's also the same case for all the comics from Dell Comics, if you divide them up. Also the titles from Fox Comics and the titles from Western Comics. Unfortunately, there is no documented data ever for Centaur publication sales, so we can't compare them. I personally believe they're probably on the low end, since those books seem to be so scarce, but that's not a guarantee. This is a fascinating time when we just see that the superhero boom is really starting to kick off. Sales were definitely up, even on the non-superhero major titles. Other interesting things of note. This month there is a comic that features a romance strip, which could be the first romance-type comic strip ever. Adolf Hitler makes his first appearance ever in comics in Amazing Mystery Funnies, Volume 2, Number 9. So lots of things starting to happen. And World War II has begun, and there's a big change in what's happening in the comic book world.